Welcome back to Proud Stutter. Today, I'm joined by two very special guests. Our co-host for this episode is Stuart Schuffman, aka Broke Ass Stuart. He's a writer, performer, TV host, newspaper columnist, and a general shit stir, which I'll probably have to beep out or something, but we'll see. And our guest for this episode is Gina Chin-David, a writer and filmmaker. She wrote, produced, and directed the award-winning feature film I Can't Sleep, which won Best Script at the Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival and Best Sci-Fi Film at the Midwest Weird Fest. So I'd like to start off by asking Gina, this ties into the theme of season 2. Can you tell us about pivotal moments or a moment you had in your life that's associated with your stutter?
Oh wow. There's so many moments. But wow, I think for me a pivotal moment that comes to mind is when I was about 12 and so I started stuttering when I was maybe around 4, if I recall. And I went into speech therapy when I was in 3rd grade and everything, and but I still stuttered. And back then it was the 90s, it was the mid 90s, so it was like very much like a fluency shaping therapy was for me. And for the most part, I was able to kind of hide it, which was a blessing and a curse, I think. But one time I remember I was calling information. You guys remember information? 411.
Yep.
Um, and I was 12 because my dad told me to call them and get some information. And I couldn't say the name of the town because, when you call information, you're supposed to say like business and you're supposed to say like San Francisco, California. Um, but I couldn't say the name of the town. And I struggled. And my dad was with me. This was on one of those old big cell phones too. We were driving one of those big cell phones. And the information person hung up on me because they couldn't hear me. And I remember being really upset and telling my dad, I just want to be able to speak. And he got like really worried about me at that point, and he got me into speech therapy again, which, this was by now it was like the late 90s. It was also very fluency shaping. And I went and did another round of speech therapy. And I think like I pretty much it was like I got more practice in terms of hiding my stutter or being able to pass as fluent, but I still stuttered, and I still do today. um, but that's kind of like I think that was a pivotal moment where my family was like, we want to get involved in helping you not stutter anymore. And I think like that was what they felt was best at the time. And I think I also felt it was best at the time, although my story continued after that and I still stuttered. So I had to keep dealing with that.
So, a couple things. First off, isn't it crazy how the 411 was basically like the internet before the internet? You could just call and ask any question; they somehow knew it. Um, besides that, though, now as someone who doesn't necessarily stutter, what skills or what tools did you use to cope with stuttering and to be able to hide it and pass?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll kind of break down the tools from speech therapy first. And um, so I did, fluency shaping therapy. I recall, let me see if I can remember the 4 tenets of it are diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing from your diaphragm, not from your upper chest.
I remember that.
You remember that? Okay, so you were there. Yes, it's there. Yeah, so we did a lot of just diaphragmatic breathing, sitting on your back and breathing practicing breathing from your diaphragm. And then easy onset. So instead of hitting the words like smack, smack, like hitting them hard, you kind of roll into them. So slowly kind of, and then the third is slow rate. So speaking at a slower rate like that, and then phonation, which I believe I just demonstrated to some extent, but like kind of blurring your sounds together, like that. But you're supposed to get so good at it that you can speed it up and talk like this. And
wow. And did it help?
You know, in some situations, yes. Like, and to be honest, I do still sometimes use some of those skills if I'm really in a jam, you know, like if I can't get a word out, I'm like, maybe I'll just try to slide into it with my breath or something like that. And so sometimes they do. The problem is they are not foolproof, and you don't know when they're going to fail or when they're going to work. So you can't necessarily walk into, and I'm sure my speech therapist at that time would disagree very strongly, but trust me, I speak from 30 plus years experience. You can't walk into a speech, your valedictorian speech, not that I was valedictorian, but you can't walk into that being like, oh, don't worry, I've got this. The tools, I just have to use the tools and it's going to be fine. Even though that's what everyone was telling me. They were like, oh, you have your tools. You shouldn't stutter anymore. The truth is, stuttering does not, it doesn't always want to cooperate with your tools. And I think people don't understand that. So yeah, those were the 4 tenets of fluency shaping. Now, I also combined that with lots of other little tricks, like I'm sure you guys talked about, like secondaries. If I can't say a word, I'll start with saying like or like. I use like a lot. I was into the Valley Girl thing. Once I figured out Valley Girl was a talking thing, I was like, this will work and I can pass. And I was using like all the time, and people were like, why? Why are you saying like so much? So it was so yeah, lots of secondaries, tricks, saying I had to go to the bathroom when it was going to be my time to read an English class, things like that. And yeah, it's a stressful existence.
Gina, when did you first come out publicly as a stutterer, and what was that like for you? Had you been open about it with your family and your friends growing up?
You know, it was really confusing for me because when I was a kid, so I had that second round of speech therapy with the big fluency shaping stuff. And I and everyone else around me all through those years, all through my teen years, was like, oh yeah, like I cured my stutter. Everyone wanted to believe it. I felt like, yeah, I pretty much don't stutter anymore. But I always felt it was my fault because I wasn't like working hard enough at the tools or something like that. And I was like, if I just work hard enough, I really will be cured. But I was working real hard. So, and I think, you know, for me, I got to college, I had some stuttering, you know, mishaps there. And people didn't know that I stuttered. I didn't share that with people really. I shared it with maybe a couple friends, and that was it. But then when I went to graduate school, I was really nervous about stuttering, and I ended up joining the NSA and meeting my stuttering community then because I was like, I need support. And that's when I met the NSA, or started with the NSA. I went to my first conference in 2010. Yeah, 2010, and I got involved with the community, and that changed my perspective. And that's when I started slowly, very slowly, coming out about my stutter. I mean, I was still really covert at the time. But that was, I think, the turning point, getting involved in the NSA and experiencing like a different way that people relate to their stuttering.
Maya, when did you come out with your stutter? Because I feel like I've known you for a few years, and I didn't even know that you stuttered until you started this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't stutter until, I didn't come out about my stutter until really the podcast. I did confide in a few friends, and when I told them, they had the same reaction, like, "Oh, I've known you for so long, like, I didn't notice." And it's funny because I had a conversation with my Aunt Carol, who I haven't seen in like 5-ish years, at my mom and dad's house last weekend, and everyone was like, "Oh, wow, like, your podcast, I didn't realize you had a stutter or that it was very," like, they knew I had a stutter because my mom would sometimes talk about it with the family, but they didn't realize it was, like, this huge thing that weighed me down. Um, and so what they said was they just noticed that I paused a lot. And that hearing my Aunt Carol say that she didn't think it was stuttering, she just thought I was pausing a lot, just made me realize, like, there's probably so many people out there that really don't have no idea a person stutters, and they assume it's just a pause, or they're not able to, like, think as quickly, or who knows, but there's so many assumptions out there. And so that just made me realize even more how important it is to help people understand what stuttering is, because really there's no accurate representation of stuttering right now that is kind of mainstream. It's all over dramatic and very it's just not a reality based version of what stuttering is.
Do you all find, this is a question for both of you, do you find that when you like drink or like like do something intoxicating, do you find that you stutter more or less?
Not a big drinker because I'm half Asian, so I turn really red and then pass out. But in the times that I have, I don't notice much of a difference. For me, I don't know about you, Maya.
Yeah, for me, I don't notice it as much. It's kind of like I kind of just let go more, and the alcohol makes me just not think about my stutter as much. So I could be stuttering all night, but say, "Oh, I had a great night and I was talking a lot." But I guess the alcohol just makes me less aware of my stutter in that way. So it's interesting because I've heard other people say that they, because of their stutter, alcohol actually makes them more fluent. But I'm wondering if it just makes them more okay with their stutters because the alcohol kind of releases the tension a little bit and all those thoughts in your head.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it makes people maybe less self-conscious
Exactly.
in general.
Yeah, I want to talk, Gina, a little bit about what drew you to film. You are a filmmaker that has won multiple awards, and I'm curious on whether or not your film career has anything to do with your stuttering journey, and if so, how?
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely intertwined. So for film, so since I was a really little kid, I was into writing. Like that was my thing. I mean, I was really little. I wrote my first story when I was like really young, like 4 maybe, and I was into stories, and I kept writing all through school, and that's what kind of kept me sane, And I think that writing was a way of expression first and foremost for me that didn't involve speaking. And I think I always felt compelled, even as a child, to share things with people, to communicate with people, to share stories. Um, I don't know, to like have that creative connection. And so writing was the way that I did it. And I always thought I would be writing. Um, but when I was about 13, my dad, my dad worked for many years in television, producing, writing, directing. And he had this job, this shoot he was doing for a week for this project. And I remember it was like right before holiday break in December, and I was in 8th grade, and I hated school. So he actually let me skip school for the week and be a PA on the set for the week, which was really cool. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'll get out of school. Like, fine, I'll do this. And I ended up really, I realized that I really liked being on the set. I just liked the energy of being on a set, and I liked the collaboration. One of the actors was my age. It was like another 13-year-old girl, so I kind of connected with her too. And I liked being helpful. And that was when I kind of was like, maybe I would like to do this kind of thing as well, like tell stories in this visual way. And then the year after, I saw this movie that changed my life, that made me want to make films, which was Rushmore by Wes Anderson.
Classic.
Classic. It was so random how I came upon that movie too. I had not heard of it, but I was at Blockbuster one weekend, and they had these weekly newsletters about, here are some new films coming out you should see. And I read about Rushmore and like what it was about, and I was like, ooh, this sounds interesting. So I watched it, and I fell in love with that movie. I remember like watching the movie was like, whoa, this is like a kind of movie that I would like to make, or something like that. So at that point I started making films. Like I joined like the AV film and video class at my school that they had, and I learned how to edit and things like that. And I started making films. I started writing screenplays and things like that, which was cool because my dad was doing that stuff. Like he writes screenplays, and so he kind of could introduce me and teach me about it a bit. But yeah, I think that what drew me to film, I think, I love music as well too. It's interesting because my mom's in music publishing, and just very into music. My whole family loves music, and I think that in a weird way, this might sound strange, but I think like film is a way to combine music and writing for me, because I think music plays a really, really big role in my stories and the stories that I choose to tell. And I think like being able to convey and share and influence emotion, like music has that capability, especially when it's combined with a visual medium. And I think at the end of the day, that's what drew me to film. Yeah, and it's just another way of expressing yourself that's not to do with talking, which is nice, I think, and it's not that I don't like to talk, it's just that I feel like my experience with talking has been kind of a struggle my whole life. And it's nice to have an area of your life where you can express yourself without that same struggle. Although there's lots of other struggles, but without that same struggle, it's like a free area to say and convey what you want to communicate to others.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So I know representation is a big theme in your creative projects. And so I'm wondering if you can talk more about that and the intersectionality that's important when we talk about stuttering and just storytelling in general.
Yeah, intersectionality is really interesting to me. So my mother's Chinese American, my father's African American, and growing up, um, this was just my family. Like I didn't think anything of it. Interestingly, it wasn't until not that interestingly, but once I went out into the world, that's when I started getting feedback about like, oh, you have this different kind of family. You're different. You're mixed. Like I didn't even hear the word mixed until I was like 8 or something like that. And I was like, what does that mean? Because we just never really like, my parents taught me and my sister to be proud of our heritage or, like history on both sides and everything like that. But it wasn't that big of a deal in my family. And I'm talking like my extended family, so cousins, aunts, uncles, stuff like that. Wasn't a big deal. But yeah, when you go out into the world, that's when people start to have issues kind of or start to give you feedback and you start to say like, oh, I think I'm different. And I think you can maybe tie that, you can draw some parallels between that and like the different models of disability, like the idea that like the social model of disability is just like society should adapt to everyone having like diversity and different needs. Um, and I think that, it's a reflection on our society that we think like one way is normal and another way is abnormal or different. And so I think like there are some parallels with that. Like also, if people didn't have negative, ignorant reactions to stuttering, I think we would all feel differently about stuttering. Like we would like, and so I think it's kind of like the idea, like, okay, well, do I have to fix my stuttering so I can be normal like everyone else, or do I have to, or does society have to kind of catch up? And that's what was so cool about the National Stuttering Awareness Week. Maya, I know you brought that into law or like you made it official in the city of San Francisco. And I do think that, yeah, and by this podcast too, it's about educating people, um, so that what maybe they thought was weird or abnormal in the past isn't so weird or abnormal, if they're educated and they can take and actually apply and integrate that knowledge, which they have to do. That's part of it. So trying to remember. So yeah, I think that for me, like representation, um, I didn't see many mixed Asian African American people on screen or whatever on film. Um, and yeah, probably, you know, I still don't, to be honest. I don't see that many. And I definitely didn't see that many stuttering representations on film either. The ones that I saw were negative, um, like you talked about. And I think for me, what I want to create in the films and the media that I create is kind of similar to how I felt growing up before I had my interaction with the world, which is like, it's just there, it's normal. And let's say there's a movie where the main character stutters, like, I think it would be groundbreaking to not even address the stutter and have the other characters just respond like, okay, yeah, I'm going to listen to you. I'm not going to be like, oh, you stutter. I'm not going to say the word stutter, basically. Like, that's what I kind of want to see. And same thing with race and, everything else. I just want to see it on there like it's the most normal thing. We don't have to make a big deal about it. We don't even have to call it out. We just want to normalize it as being there, because I think that was my experience in life, and I think that could benefit a lot of people.
I completely agree. And so I guess one of the last questions, and Stuart, if you have a last one to feel free to chime in. But what creative projects are you working on right now, and how was it making your first feature film? So I guess that's 2 last questions for me.
Just so you all know, if I bounce for 1 second, I have to run and let a dog in, but I promise.
No worries. Yeah.
Okay. No worries. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with what my feature film was like. So okay, making movies since I was a teenager, short films, like a documentary about my high school's jazz band going to play at Yoshi's in Oakland back in the day, which was fun
Cool.
to film. Yeah, or just little films that I would make with my friends, very short narratives, music videos, really into those. I continued doing that through college. And then, I always wanted to make a feature movie. In fact, I want to make lots of features. And, the issue is money. I went into the mental health field. So that was what I pursued professionally. But I kept making films and writing. I wrote books, all sorts of things. And about, I want to say 2017, I got to the point financially where I could save some money basically. And I was getting more work in the mental health field. I was working a lot. And I was kind of like, well, what am I going to do with this money? I'm working so hard. I happened to read about this thing called micro budget filmmaking, which is kind of what it sounds like, which is making films on micro budgets. And specifically, the example I looked at was this movie called Frisky by Claudia Pickering, who's very nice. She reached out to me afterwards, after my movie came out. And she filmed Frisky in San Francisco, I think in 2016, maybe, somewhere around there, for $5,000. And
Wow, that's nothing.
I know, it's nothing. And she filmed in 2 weeks, and it was good. She did a good job, and the movie went on to festivals and got some buzz. And so I was really interested in how she did that, and I was like, I think I can save $5,000 if she could. And so I was just studying the film, I was listening to every podcast she was on. I was like, I want to just do this. And she's in San Francisco, super expensive San Francisco, like me. So I ended up saving or working and saving $10,000 over about a year. And I had this plan that with $10,000, I was going to make my first feature. I was going to write it and direct it and produce it. And I wrote a few different scripts that year. I knew that I had to write a script that was going to be able to be filmed on $10,000. And so the first 2 scripts I wrote, they were a little bit too big in scope. So I was like, I'm going to have to. And then I just had this idea for the movie that became I Can't Sleep, which is my first feature movie. I wrote the script. It didn't take too long, actually. It was kind of 2 different ideas that I'd had in my head for years and years that just kind of combined to make this movie. And I figured, okay, what are the locations I have access to? I have access to my apartment. I have access to my boyfriend's store, at the store, and I could film there. My aunt gave her permission for me to film at her house too. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so I just went about, once I finished and rewrote the script, I started hiring cast and auditioning. I just kind of did it, I knew that this was going to be a big learning experience for me because I'd never made a film on this scope. And it was still very small scale, micro budget. But, I just jumped in. I was like, if I want to be a filmmaker, I'm going to have to make films, because I really do think that's the only way, at least with film. You have to just go out and do it. You can sit in the classroom and talk about film all the time. And yeah, I took film theory classes in college. I took screenwriting. I was very much into it, but I was like, the only way that I'm going to learn how to be a filmmaker is making films, like, you know, bigger films now. I think I'm like ready after making small films for a long time. So I did it. It was not easy. It was very hard. All in all, filmed about a total, I want to say, of like 12 days. And, you know, but I finished it. We finished it, and I got it edited. I brought on my friend, the Holographic Children, a singer-songwriter, to do the score. You know, music's really important to me. And he did a great job. And then the movie was done suddenly. Suddenly I had a finished feature film. It was crazy.
Wow.
It was
That's
crazy.
awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, it was really amazing. It was kind of unreal. It was like, I remember it was October 2020 by the time the film, like I like got the film, it was complete. And I was like, great, I can start submitting to festivals. And so I did. And we got into a bunch of festivals, and then it won some awards, which was really cool.
So
during
cool.
the pandemic. Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it was great. It was like, you know, when I was struggling to make the film and dealing with setbacks and all that stuff, like, you know, it's kind of like when you're making it, you're like, I don't know how this is going to pan out, if like anything's going to happen with this, you know, and that's kind of how it is with a lot of undertakings that we do. And, but I'm very happy with how, you know, finishing it for one thing, and then also that it got into festivals, and that, you know, it like won awards, and then, you know, having random people who I don't know be like, oh, I watched your film at this festival, it was really good, and you know, so like that was really cool. So I think you know, I couldn't have expected better. and it was a learning experience. You know, I learned so much from that experience. And so yeah, so now I'm working on my next film. And
Ooh.
yeah, I'm working on the script.
This one will be $11,000.
Yeah, well, you know, well, it depends how much I could, you know, I could save, or, you know, I might ask for money or try to get money somehow. I'm definitely going to have a bigger budget, but I want to film it at the end of, ideally at the end of this year, although that's going to be coming up in like tomorrow. So, but maybe early 2023. And I just want to keep making films. And I also write, and I'm going to release a tiny book. I'm into writing, you know, really small books. I'm going to release a tiny book in a couple weeks, just of random short vignettes that I've written.
Cool.